Should we get started? I think we left off. We were about to jump into Prince Humperdinck's portion of the chapter. Um, for some reason I keep wanting to call him Farquaad from from Shrek. Um, is that how it? That's his name, right? I think I said that right. And I'm gonna try and do because we stopped in the middle of the chapter. I'm gonna try and do kind of a recap to see to just sort of remind myself of what we did. We read chapter 4, which was basically a single sentence, and then we read chapter 5, where Princess Buttercup, well, soon to be Princess Buttercup, she hasn't, or no, she was made a princess. Yeah, she was made a princess before the wedding, so that he could be saying that he was marrying royalty. That's right. And then they had the introduction to the people, and she became like the princess of the people, basically. Um, and then there was this really awesome foreshadow with a figure in black who was watching her, and it was all creepy and stalkery, kind of. But it was really good. It was a really good foreshadow moment that I think wasn't in the movie, and I thought that was really cool. It just brought the man in black into the story a little bit earlier. Um, so she's out riding and she gets kidnapped by these three, uh, what do we call them? Hooligans? um, these three guys kidnap her. She's in a boat. She jumps overboard. They manage to grab her back on board the ship before the sharks eat her, and then they reach the cliffs of mercenaries. That's that's better than hooligans. Yeah. Um, they reach the cliffs of insanity. They start climbing. Wait, no, wait. I'm still in the sharks. Hold on. Yeah, okay. So they're climbing, and then they see that the man in black is following them. Um, they get up to the top of the cliff. They drop the rope. Hopefully that the man in black starts falling, and he doesn't. He catches himself. He starts climbing. The Sicilian says to the Spaniard, "You stay back, and you're gonna kill him, and we're gonna go ahead, and then you're gonna meet us." And then there is the entirely omitted from the movie, like, backstory, um, about how his father died, Inigo Montoya's father. And I understand why they left it out of the movie, because they were able to kind of achieve that just with his character's drive and, like, just comments here and there peppered throughout the movie. They didn't feel the need to, like, do the full backstory. I get that. But I really enjoyed reading it. Kind of having it all in one place, and having sort of his relationship with his kind of his mentor after his father passes. I liked that part. I thought it was just more, just a little bit more, like, kind of a fullness of the character that it brought in. Not to say that he was completely flat in the movie, but I just thought, I think what it is I just like different, because I've seen The Princess Bride how many times. So I like that there was kind of an adjacent thing that wasn't in the movie, because it kind of gives a little bit of a draw to the book. Why would you want to watch the movie and also read the book? Because they have slightly different stories. They have variation. So I enjoyed that part. And then we moved on. We're back to the present. Inigo faces the man in black. And he is bested. But the man in black is like, I can't kill someone with the amount of talent that you have. And so he leaves him tied up to a tree. And he continues on. The Sicilian says to the Turk, "You have to," the giant, "you have to stay behind now and beat him in your own way, using strength of force rather than your sword." And so the Sicilian takes Princess Buttercup and continues forward. The giant stays behind to slow down or beat the Man in Black. Then we get a little bit of Fezzik's backstory, Fezzik being the giant, and we we get another instance of parents in stories, in backstories, are not good people. But they loved Fezzik, and I guess they made the most of what they could with his unusual bodily giantness, whatever he is. Having a full mustache at age 6 or something like that. So we go through that backstory, which they exploited him. Yeah, call it what it was. And they also, what was it? He told them his greatest fear, and then they were like, "Oh, we're gonna take that and use that against you." I felt that the Fezzik's backstory was a little bit more, like, didn't come through in the movie as much as it did in the book. And I think I remember hearing that the reason for that was the difficulty in Andre the Giant was the one that they wanted to cast, and he was not an actor, and so they had to really simplify his role because getting him to act the way that they wanted was such a challenge. That's the, I don't remember where I read that, but that's the impression I get, which is, I think, kind of true anytime you're hiring someone who's not an actor. There's always going to be a little bit of like a learning curve for them. If it's their first ever movie and the only thing they've ever done before was like Andre the Giant was a wrestler, I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. I don't know exactly any. I know very little about his pro wressler. Okay. Anytime you have someone where like their main thing is something else, and then you just plop them into a movie set, they're not necessarily like they're gonna need a lot more coaching. Fezzik's backstory is actually pretty close to Andre's. Really? That's kind of upsetting. But I'm assuming you mean like he was really didn't lose a lot of fights and just kind of bested everybody that they could put in front of him. I hope it doesn't mean that he had kind of a awful home life with his parents exploiting him. But Fezzik, I found myself really, like, when I was reading the his backstory, but also when he's meeting up with the Man in Black, I found myself really kind of, he felt like much more of a sympathetic character, whereas in the movie it was kind of like just a little bit of like he's the comic relief. I mean, all of them have their own comical quirks, but I felt like Fezzik, like with the rhyming and just kind of like the slower speech patterns, it was kind of like he was a good balance for Vizzini, who was like very fast spoken and like used these huge words. It kind of balanced it out a little bit better. Whereas I think in the book there's still a little bit of that, but I think in the book he's much more of like, oh man, I feel bad for him. I really want the best for him. Whereas the Sicilian, there was like, in the book, there's nothing really redeeming that's like, oh, I don't want this. I don't want anything bad to happen to this character. You're kind of like, okay, he's there so that we can hate him, but not as much as we hate Prince Humperdinck. So then we moved forward, and the Man in Black bested Fezzik. Fezzik goes down, unconscious but not dead. And, or actually, do we know that he's unconscious but not dead? Yes. it is confirmed in the book. So Fezzik is unconscious, and the Man in Black continues onward. Vicini's waiting for them. They do the whole famous iocane powder thing, which is why I had to keep reading because I love that scene. And then Vicini succumbs to the effects of the iocane powder, and Buttercup and the Man in Black have their kind of confrontational moment. He accuses her of not being able to love. She says that she loved very deeply, and you cannot possibly imagine how much love has hurt me. And then she figures out, after pushing him down a hill, there's a bug in front of my face. She figures out that he is her beloved Wesley. From his position at the point of the Armada, Prince Humperdinck stared up at the cliffs of insanity. This was just like any other hunt. He made himself think away the quarry. It did not matter if you were after an antelope or a bride-to-be. The procedures held. You gathered evidence. Then you acted. You studied. Then you performed. If you studied too little, the chances were strong that your actions would also be too late. You had to take time, and so, frozen in thought, he continued to stare up the sheer face of the cliffs. Obviously, someone had recently climbed them. There were foot scratchings all the way up a straight line, which meant most certainly a rope, an arm-over-arm climb up a 1,000-foot rope with occasional foot kicks for balance. To make such a climb required both strength and planning, so the prince made those marks in his brain. My enemy is strong. My enemy is not impulsive. Now his eyes reached a point perhaps 300 feet from the top. Here it began to get interesting. Now the foot scratchings were deeper, more frequent, and they followed no direct ascending line. Either someone left the rope 300 feet from the top intentionally, which made no sense, or the rope was cut while that someone was still 300 feet from safety. For clearly, this last part of the climb was made up the rock face itself. But who had such talent? And why had he been called to exercise it at such a deadly time, 700 feet above disaster? I must examine the tops of the cliffs of insanity, the prince said, without bothering to turn. From behind him, Count Rugen only said, "Done," and awaited further instructions. Send half the Armada south along the coastline, the other north. They should meet by twilight near the fire swamp. Our ship will sail to the first landing possibility, and you will follow me with your soldiers. Ready the whites. Count Rugen signaled the cannoneer, and the prince's instructions boomed along the cliffs. Within minutes, the Armada had begun to split, with only the prince's giant ship sailing alone, closest to the coastline, looking for a landing possibility. There, the prince ordered. Did I have a voice for the prince? I feel like I'm just reading him sort of neutral, but he was, I think I kind of raised my, this thing, larynx, because I think I wanted to make him like a little bit, tiny bit whiny. Yeah, I don't remember either. I'm just gonna do whatever it feels like in the moment. There, the prince ordered, some time later, and his ship began maneuvering into the cove for a safe place to anchor. That took time, but not much, because the captain was skilled, and more than that, the prince was quick to lose patience, and no one dared risk that. Humperdinck jumped from ship to shore. A plank was lowered, and the whites were led to ground. Of all his accomplishments, none pleased the prince as did these horses. Some day he would have an army of them. Hold on, I remembered how to do this. No, I don't want to pin that message. I did it. But I also forgot where I was. So he's talking about his horses. Yeah, okay. Of all his accomplishments, none pleased the prince as did these horses. Some day he would have an army of them, but getting the bloodlines perfect was a slow business. He now had 4 whites, and they were identical. Snowy, tireless giants, 20 hands high. 20 hands? I think the normal, the average horse is like 12 to 14 hands, if I'm remembering right. So these are big horses. All right. He now had 4 whites, and they were identical. Snowy, tireless giants, 20 hands high. On flat land, nothing could catch them, and even on hills and rocky terrain, there was nothing short of Araby close to their equal. The prince, when rushed, rode all 4, bareback, the only way he ever rode. Riding 1, leading 3, changing beasts in mid-stride so that no single animal had to bear his bulk to the tiring point. Now he mounted and was gone. It took him considerably less than an hour to reach the edge of the cliffs of insanity. He dismounted, went to his knees, commenced his study of the terrain. There had been a rope tied around a giant oak. The bark at the base was broken and scraped, so probably whoever first reached the top untied the rope, and whoever was on the rope at that moment was 300 feet from the peak and somehow survived the climb. A great jumble of footprints caused him trouble. It was hard to ascertain what had gone on. Perhaps a conference, because 2 sets of footprints seemed to lead off while 1 remained pacing the cliff edge. Then there were 2 on the cliff edge. Humperdinck examined the prints until he was certain of 2 things. A fencing match had taken place. The combatants were both masters. The stride length, the quickness of the foot feints, all clearly revealed to his unfailing eye, made him reassess his second conclusion. They were at least masters. Probably better. Then he closed his eyes and concentrated on smelling out the blood. Surely, in a match of such ferocity, blood must have been spilled. Now it was a matter of giving his entire body over to his sense of smell. The prince had worked at this for many years, ever since a wounded tigress had surprised him from a tree limb while he was tracking her. He had let his eyes follow the blood hunt then, and it had almost killed him. Now he trusted only his olfactories. If there was blood within 100 yards, he would find it. He opened his eyes, moved without hesitation toward a group of large boulders until he found the blood drops. There were few of them, and they were dry, but less than 3 hours old. Humperdinck smiled. When you had the whites under you, 3 hours was a finger snap. He retraced the duel then, for it confused him. It seemed to range from cliff edge and back, then return to the cliff edge. And sometimes the left foot seemed to be leading, sometimes the right, which made no logical sense at all. Clearly, swordsmen were changing hands, but why would a master do that unless his good arm was wounded to the point of uselessness? And that clearly had not happened, because a wound of that depth would have left blood spores, and there was simply not enough blood in the area to indicate that. Strange, strange. Humperdinck continued his wanderings. Stranger still, the battle could not have ended in death. He knelt by the outline of a body. Clearly, a man had lain unconscious here, but again, no blood. There was a mighty duel, Prince Humperdinck said, directing his comment toward Count Rugen, who had finally caught up, together with a contingent of 100 mounted men-at-arms. My guess would be... And for a moment the prince paused, following footsteps. Would be that whoever fell here ran off there, and he pointed one way, and that whoever was the victor ran off along the mountain path in almost precisely the opposite direction. It is also my opinion that the victor was following the path taken by the princess. Shall we follow them both? The count asked. I think not, Prince Humperdinck replied. Whoever is gone is of minimal importance, since whoever has the princess is the whoever we're after, and because we don't know the nature of the trap we might be being led into, we need all the arms we have in one band. Clearly this has been planned by countrymen of Gilder, and nothing must ever be put past them. You think this is a trap, then? The count asked. I always think everything is a trap until proven otherwise, the prince answered, which is why I'm still alive. And with that he was back aboard a white and galloping. When he reached the mountain path where the hand fight happened, the prince did not even bother dismounting. Everything that could be seen was quite visible from horseback. Someone has beaten a giant, he said, when the Count was close enough. The giant has run away, do you see? The Count, of course, saw nothing but rock and mountain path. I would not think to doubt you. And look there, cried the prince, because now he saw for the first time, in the rubble of the mountain path, the footsteps of a woman. The princess is alive. And again the whites were thundering across the mountain. When the Count caught up with him again, the prince was kneeling over the still body of a hunchback. The Count dismounted. Smell this, the prince said, and he handed up a goblet. Nothing, the Count said. No odor at all. Iocane, the prince replied. I would bet my life on it. I know of nothing else that kills so silently. He stood up then. The princess was still alive. Her footprints follow the path. He shouted at the 100 mounted men. There will be great suffering in Gilder if she dies. On foot now, he ran along the mountain path, following the footsteps that he alone could see. And when those footsteps left the path for wilder terrain, he followed still. Strung out behind him, the Count and all the soldiers did their best to keep up. Men stumbled, horses fell, even the Count tripped from time to time. Prince Humperdinck never even broke stride. He ran steadily, mechanically, his barrel legs pumping like a metronome. It was 2 hours after dawn when he reached the steep ravine. Odd, he said to the Count, who was tiring badly. The Count continued only to breathe deeply. 2 bodies fell to the bottom, and they did not come back up. That is odd, the Count managed. No, that isn't what's odd, the prince corrected. Clearly, the kidnapper did not come back up because the climb was too steep, and our cannons must have let him know that they were closely pursued. His decision, which I applaud, was to make better time running along the ravine floor. The Count waited for the prince to continue. It's just odd that a man who is a master fencer, a defeater of giants, an expert in the use of iocane powder, would not know what this ravine opens into. And what is that? Asked the Count. The fire swamp, said Prince Humperdinck. Then we have him, said the Count. Precisely so. It was a well-documented trait of his to smile only just before the kill. His smile was very much in evidence now. Wesley, indeed, had not the least idea that he was racing dead into the fire swamp. He knew only, once Buttercup was down at the ravine bottom beside him, that to climb out would take, as Prince Humperdinck had assumed, too much time. Wesley noted only that the ravine bottom was flat rock and heading in the general direction he wanted to follow. So he and Buttercup fled along, both of them very much aware that gigantic forces were following them, and undoubtedly cutting into their lead. The ravine grew increasingly sheer as they went along, and Wesley soon realized that whereas once he probably could have helped her through the climb, now there was simply no way of doing so. He had made his choice, and there was no changing possible. Wherever the ravine led was their destination, and that, quite simply, was that. Hi there. Thanks for joining our book club. If you'd like to join the conversation, I would love it if you would leave us a comment. And if you'd like to see more, check out the playlist.